and welcome to Sheila Lives Out Loud. I'm Sheila Moniga and I'm grateful you've stopped by my channel. Please click subscribe and hit notifications for more content. As always, do drop a comment in the comment section below and share this video if you like it. Now, following months of prolonged disruption of normal everyday life, following the COVID pandemic, cases of sexual and gender-based violence are on the rise. Sadly, cases of deaths are being reported in the media, leaving grieving families and hurt people. But there's something that we all can do. We must speak up and begin to use the channels that are available locally to seek help, report abuse, and support survivors. In addressing the worrying cases of abuse and gender-based violence, in today's episode, I'm going to share excerpts from two conversations that we've had on this channel previously that are as relevant and vital today as they were back in Season 2 when we first shared them. We begin with Fanis Lisiagali, the Executive Director of Healthcare Assistance Kenya, on the genesis of the 24-hour Abuse and Gender-Based Violence Helpline 1195, which was officially launched in 2017.
It has been a long journey, so to speak, from 2007 and 2008 when we had post-election violence in this country. That is when this hotline was born. I'm looking at a scenario where we collected data through 1195, data from 2013 to 2016. We've collected over 9,000 gender-based violence cases. And we're wondering, because they're not going down.
They're on the
and
rise.
This is the time we're saying we must end sexual and gender-based violence on women.
As we talk about gender-based violence, I think it's very important that we define what gender-based violence is, because somebody could be watching and thinking, okay, it's only rape, it's only assault on only women and only children. But it's far bigger. So tell us about what constitutes gender-based violence.
Gender-based violence is affecting all of us. Men, women, children, even babies. Sheila, you won't believe this. We've rescued children as young as 5 months, defiled. 1 year, 2 months, defiled. 2 years, 3 years. I mean, it's affecting all of us. So we cannot say that it's a woman's issue. It is also affecting men. We've had cases where men and their organs have been, attacked as well. Yeah, their genitals are cut. Yeah, the problem
and again,
I have
those
with
are the
men,
things that show up in the news. The nation stops, watches, and we move on until the next
We also
episode.
need to protect men. Because if you target a man's organ, really, what are you doing as a woman?
That is violence. That is
still violence on men. Or if you perhaps boil water and burn this man, that is still violence. So it's not just about women, or even girl child. Even boys are being sodomized. The person who has been affected, just be bold, break the silence, call the helpline, which is a toll-free, totally toll-free helpline.
Whether you're on a cell phone or a landline?
No, cell phone.
Right.
The reason we use cell phones is because, sometimes with that stigma, and then with the fear, you want to go to the police or you want to go to a gender violence recovery center, for example, the Nairobi Women's Gender Violence Recovery Center, or any other government hospital. And I'm glad we are now partnering with the State Department of Gender, which makes this a lot easier, actually under the Ministry of Public Service, Youth and Gender Affairs. We are partners, and therefore, supporting these survivors, it has become a little easier because they'll go to any government hospital and they are supported. So the reason we use mobiles is because we want to walk survivors through and through. From the time it happened, they'll call the helpline, 1195. We give them very brief counseling services.
And that's a 24-hour hotline.
It's a 24-hour.
Right. Okay.
We have more than 20 telecounselors on standby. So when they call, with that brief telecounseling services, then we are referring them to other service providers. If it is an absolute emergency that warrants rescue, then we are again coordinating the rescue mission. Make sure that this survivor gets to hospital immediately.
Right.
We have partners like the Kenyan Red Cross. We have the MSF France, MSF Belgium.
And this is for evacuation?
Yes, for evacuation.
Okay.
Then from there to hospitals. If it is a survivor that is able to make it to hospital, the nearest hospital could be a health center or a government facility. We'll just direct them there. So with that SMS or with that call coming through, then we are walking the survivor. Every step they go, we are walking with them. From ambulance, as I said, to that medical facility, to if they're admitted again, we will get there to again help.
And help them from the
Yes,
hospital.
if they were not able to go to the police, we will talk to the police to go and see them from their hospital beds.
Okay, here's my question. 3-year-old boy has gone through all this. The 3-year-old doesn't know how to call the number.
Yeah, the mother will.
As a neighbor, if I am a neighbor and I know that something terrible is happening, have I got the right to call?
Yes.
Because many times people say, "Iyo sio shughuli yako, why are you in my business?"
Let me tell you, this is our business, all of us. We are in it. Because you don't know, that neighbor may not know when their child will be attacked. And so we're saying the 1195 number is bringing us all together to work as a frontier team to make sure that we end GBV, gender-based violence, on all of us. Men are suffering in silence. In fact, more than women. But because of that ego in them, they don't want to blow it out. They don't want to say, my wife beat me up. But I'm happy others have started talking.
Yes.
Yes.
It's
They're
all
talking.
about talking and just sharing and being honest, because you can't change something if you ignore it. If I live somewhere and I think a 14-year-old is living in a house with a 70-year-old man, can I call that helpline? Will it help that young girl?
Yes, yes. During the International Women's Day, the government of Kenya and UN launched a joint GBV program in this country.
Right.
Meaning, there's a lot of seriousness to also protect our girls against early marriage. The early marriage campaign was also launched. And we have the hashtag, the Jitokeze hashtag. It has been running for a long time, since last year, I think October, Jitokeze. And thanks to our PS, the State Department of Gender. Yes, Jitokeze 1195. I would like to add Jitokeze, ongea kuhusu GBV. Piga 1195. Kujitokeza tu ni kupiga simu.
Nipiga simu. Usinyamaze alafu kesho ndio unaambia wenye habari, sasa tulikuwa tukisikia wakipigana kila siku, and then something terrible has come. Speak up now. Don't be an interview about what was. Be a phone call about what is.
Absolutely.
In focusing on violence, I also spoke with local psychologist and relationships guru Dr. Chris Hart on the psychology of abuse. So, who is violent? And can you spot an abuser before the violence begins?
We're all capable of violence. People sort of talk about it as a sort of moral issue, as if we shouldn't be violent. Of course, that is true, but the reality is, if you push anybody hard enough, they will get their fists out, won't they? And society actually admires that in certain circumstances, doesn't it? I mean, the man who is defending his family in a row on the street, you know what I mean? So you can't just simply say violence is wrong, and you can't say all abuse is violence. Now, Violence in the wrong context is dreadful.
Is when there's a problem.
And abuse is much, much wider. I mean, everybody thinks of violence as literally fists and weapons and things like that. But it's almost worse when there are no fists and no weapons. Because, for example, if someone is physically attacking you, probably it's going to cross your mind that this relationship should be over.
Exactly.
But if they're being very subtle and somehow manipulating you in a way that's almost indetectable, but inexorably
logical, really,
then you probably don't notice it happening until it's too late. Years may have gone by.
Okay.
So, in fact, you know, the subtler forms of abuse can be just as bad, if not worse, than violence.
Okay. Understanding abuse and just knowing that there are evil things and very quiet, deep, disturbing psychological shifts that can be happening in a relationship, I begin to think, how soon can you notice that someone's got the kind of behavior that is not good for you, that you will not be safe with this person? How can you identify it? And when should you be able to identify it?
Right. I mean, the problem is this. A lot of people who become abusers are actually totally charming when you first meet them. They are excellent manipulators. So when they take you out on a date, they're in manipulation style. You know, they are being wonderful, they're being romantic, they're being attentive and all the rest of it. So the chances of you spotting them on first meeting are a bit slim. In fact, you probably think they're a bit too good to be true, and that might be your first red flag. You know, for example, a normal person, male or female, incidentally, it's worth saying that abusers are equal opportunity.
It goes both ways.
100% 50-50.
Yeah.
But the first red flag is probably that this person's too good to be true. They're just too charming, too attentive, too friendly. And you think, hang about, normal people are a bit nervous in this situation. When people go into posh restaurants, they're supposed to be just a bit ill at ease.
Yeah.
And when they meet this charming person for the first time, they're a bit, you know. So if somebody's not like that, that should be your first warning. But then the real warnings come with, for example, how they treat other people. They're being so nice to you, but they're short to the waiter.
Yes.
And you think, hang about, that wasn't quite right.
Who does that?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So if you begin to see things like that, you should have a question mark. As you start to talk with them, you start asking questions about their background and their education and their childhood and what they do for a living and their interests. And you'll begin to spot a few more signs. You know, a collection of AK-47s would be a dead giveaway.
It's just like, da-da.
Yes.
These are my babies.
I mean, I'm joking, but you understand.
But I do get it, yes.
You know, if you start seeing that there's something a little bit odd, I mean, for example, a loner, somebody who just doesn't seem to have a relationship history, describes spending the weekend doing odd things, cataloguing their DVD collection, you know, and setting it out by colour code or something.
Right.
These are not normal behaviours. And you start picking up a few of those, you've got another red flag. And of course, as the time goes on, it'll be how they treat you.
Yeah.
And if you begin to notice that they are a bit insecure with you, they start accusing you of looking at the others.
Who's that? Why are you looking at that person?
Yeah.
Do you know this person? Why are you standing so close to them?
Start picking stuff like that up, and you're beginning to wonder. You might start to notice some grandiose behaviour. You know, they think an awful lot of themselves. There's a big ego there. You might start to notice some irrational mood changes, some anger. You start seeing things like that, big red flag. Now, the big point about saying all this is that if you get into a relationship which becomes abusive and you're in it for years, it can be extraordinarily difficult to disentangle yourself. It's not difficult after one or two dates. So you should play incredibly safe. In other words, you see something that is potentially a bit weird. Don't think twice.
Now that we've skated into psychological abuse, let's define that. Walk us through what that's like, because it's not physical, but it's things that are happening that beat you down mentally. So what are some of the things that people do that constitute psychological abuse?
There's a big range of possibilities. I mean,
Well, let's just talk about a few.
Yeah,
common
what I
ones.
mean is that people are quite many and varied and subtle, you know. A common one, for example, is taking control. Gradually you begin to realize that your world is shrinking, that I'm a bit funny about your friends, and I don't like you going to see your mum. And I keep saying ever such charming things like, oh, don't go out tonight, let's stay in and have some quality time, you know. And it all sounds like it's going in the right direction.
Right.
But gradually you realize your life's
You have no
becoming
friends.
small. You have no
Yes.
friends. Another type of abuse is you're being restricted in your choice of work. Maybe you're being encouraged not to work. Maybe your interests, your hobbies, all these things are gradually diminished. Maybe your coming and going is getting monitored, you know. Anytime you're away from the house, you get 48 messages.
Where are you?
Endless phone calls.
You didn't tell me you were leaving.
And when are you coming back? And, you know, controlling.
Right.
I think you can imagine that initially that actually feels quite nice.
Oh, he
He
cares.
cares, he loves me. And it's always expressed like that.
Yes.
I think you can picture that as your world begins to diminish and you talk to less people, you get gradually more and more vulnerable. You are depending on this person more and more. He's probably by now the breadwinner, and he's probably got all the bank accounts, and you're existing on 20,000 a month, you know, so it goes on. You don't, and your choices begin to be limited. You somehow you're not consulted, you know, in financial decisions, and you gradually become a little doormat.
Right.
Not a very nice place. And another form of abuse is where it's me who's up to some mischief, and somehow I'm managing to convince you that you've got it all wrong. So I didn't say what you thought I said, and your memory of the event was completely different, and I totally convince you that you're nuts.
No.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you can imagine that's quite disturbing, because you end up sitting there thinking, I'm sure I remember that happening, and yet I've convinced you that it didn't. Or the reverse.
Or I'm sure you said that, but you've convinced me.
That I didn't hear it. And don't forget that women do it just as much as men.
Okay. Again.
Yeah, forgive me saying this.
It applies to both.
You know, even it's true that women are actually more violent in the home than men are.
Really?
But of course, what happens is that, first of all, there's a focus on the women. And secondly, of course, men are bigger than women, so the women are more likely to get injured. So the stats in the casualty departments, there's more women than men. And an awful lot of men turn up in casualty departments with stab wounds, for example, and say, I was in a bar brawl.
And
they
no,
won't admit that it was their wife.
it was Mama who did it. Then again, that just takes us back to how people perceive injuries on men and injuries on women. But let's go back to something you were talking about, abuse in childhood.
Right.
In learning about these behaviors from the environment and our parents, and other things that also happen to kids.
Yes. I mean, everybody's sort of aware of the child that is being abused. And obviously that's horrible. And they tend to develop into the person who looks for an abuser. Their idea of family life is that it involves fists and...
There must be abuse in there somewhere.
I don't know what to call it really, but it's what they become familiar with. And I'm afraid we go looking for the same thing in our relationships. So of course, as an adult, this person will say, oh, I had a terrible childhood. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen to me now. But they go looking for the person who is likely to be just that person. Very, very nasty.
Yeah.
There's also the other end of the spectrum, though. I mean, you get an awful lot of children who are brought up in very permissive or even neglectful families, chaotic families, the sort of family where the child doesn't really know what the rules are, the sort of family where the child grows up very impulsive and very likely to lash out with its fists when things go wrong. Has never been taught, you know, to share with their siblings and all the other things. Now imagine that child becoming a teenager, now we're the gang member, we're the person who's going to start getting involved in crime and all the rest of it. People shouldn't be naive. You know, you're going into a relationship, there is always the possibility of something going wrong in a relationship. And so right from the word go, you should be watching for red flags, for not just abuse, for lots of other things, you know, infidelity and so on.
Right.
And you shouldn't go into a relationship unless clearly they're getting a tick in every box and you are happy and you feel an independent person who is growing in the relationship. And similarly later, if abuse starts, if any form of abuse, however subtle, starts, you should grab hold of it straight away. And if you have any doubts in your mind about how to deal with it, talk to somebody who's expert in the area, because it is not something you should ever for one moment tolerate.
Ever.
And the whole idea of being in a long relationship that's unhappy like that is just too awful to think about. So you should, the moment you begin to wonder, you should talk to somebody.
If you're in trouble or know someone who needs help, please use this number, 1195. Once again, 1195. Share this number with your friends, with your family, with everybody. If you're a neighbor, please use that number. Get active. Speak up. You can make a difference. 1195 is a 24-hour helpline for sexual and gender-based violence in Kenya. Seek help, and let's live out loud once again in next week's episode.